On the 16th of December 1944, the winter stillness of the Ardennes forest was shattered by a colossal German artillery barrage. Operation Wacht am Rhein had begun. Hi, I'm Robert Poyton. Thanks for joining me today on the Dragon's Teeth Gaming channel. So Operation Wacht am Rhein, or Watch on the Rhine, was the German code name for the Ardennes offensive, or what became known as the Battle of the Bulge. And this is a Second World War campaign that's always fascinated me, I think perhaps for a number of reasons. From a military perspective, it's this, some would say, a crazy plan that Hitler hatched up to drive through the Ardennes, as of course the German army had done before twice, First World War and the beginning of the Second World War. So they were going to drive through the Ardennes and head for the port of Antwerp, maybe even Brussels as well. And the aim was to split the Allied army in two. The reasoning behind that was that this would cause the Allied armies to halt, perhaps even to fall out, and create some sort of stalemate or ceasefire situation on the Western Front. So we've got this, some would say, crazy plan. We've got a dash for bridges and fuel dumps. In some cases, a bridge was actually blown up right in the face of the attackers. We've got elements like Skorzény's commandos, operatives in American uniform working behind American lines. We've got parachute drops, and we've got brave stands by vastly outnumbered and in some cases outgunned forces as well. Because I know there's a general narrative that the American units in the Bulge just folded and collapsed at the first sign of the Germans. And while that was true in some cases, there were also a lot of instances of small American units holding out, holding vital crossroads, holding vital villages, and of course the famous siege of Bastogne as well. So that makes for a very interesting campaign on a tactical and strategic level, because of course this was happening in midwinter, not in springtime as the previous invasions through the Ardennes had been. And this was done with some really heavy equipment as well. So we also have that appeal, if you like, of the late war German equipment, the Panthers, the King Tigers, and so on as well. With that idea of racing for bridges and racing to hold crossroads and other vital areas, from a gaming perspective, it offers not only a good recreation of the battle as it was, but also throws up a lot of potential what-if scenarios as well. So what I'm going to do today is look at three of my favourite books on the campaign. I've read a ton of books on this. There are plenty of books available from all different perspectives. What I thought I'd do today is take a look at one book that gives us an overall view of the whole campaign. We'll look at another book that works on a more personal level, and then we'll also look at a book that gives us a gaming perspective as well. Our first title then, our overview of the whole campaign, is simply called Battle of the Bulge 1944, and our author is Lieutenant General Sir Napier Crookenden, KGB DSO OBE, served for 37 years in the British Army as an infantry and parachute soldier and a helicopter pilot, and he was at one time commandant of the Royal Military College of Science. And one aspect that I really like of this book, as I did with the Captain Eric Brown book I spoke about last time, is here's a man who was on the spot, because there is a picture of Field Marshal Montgomery, newly appointed Colonel Commandant of the Parachute Regiment, and various brigade and other commanders behind, and the author is in the top left corner there. This is an Ian Allen book published in 1980, and it opens with our general map of the Ardennes campaign. There's the Bulge that the campaign got its name from, and then we're into the German plan. So really the planning for this started on the 16th of September 1944 with Hitler. And this was largely Hitler's brainchild, this operation. A lot of his commanders said it was too ambitious and tried to get him to scale back, but to no avail. So that's the outline of the German plan. We get an outline of the Allied positions, and of course the Ardennes was seen as something of a quiet sector. Surely nothing is going to happen there. So it was a place where units were often sent to rest. We get an overview of the general weapons, mostly Shermans for the Americans, Panzer IVs, Panthers, etc., and the King Tigers, of course, for the Germans, and artillery, which played a major part in, well, pretty much every Second World War campaign. The main thrust was from the 6th SS Panzer Army in the centre, with the 5th to the south and Kampfgruppe Piper to the north. So we open with that attack. And now there are some photos in here that you will recognise. There's that very famous scene from Potto, of course. But I did find with this book, there are also a lot of photographs that I've not seen before. Most of them are marked up as Imperial War Museum and US Army, but there were quite a number I'd not seen here before. Further south we've got the 5th Panzer Army, so we've got some detailed maps as we go through, and again it's very photograph heavy, this book, which I like. We get a good view of the campaign, but also these photos are very evocative, some of them as well. And then we move to the northern flank with the 1st SS Panzer Division and Kampfgruppe Piper. And again, this was very much a battle of racing for bridges, trying to get fuel dumps in the face of increasingly determined American opposition. And a major part of that sector of the campaign was the battle for St. Vith, of course. So the author goes into some detail on that. And we also get these nice drawings that were made at the time by an American soldier called Harrison Stanley. There's quite a few of these scattered throughout the book. Very interesting. And here we can see the sort of conditions that units were operating in. The sky was cloudy and overcast, which was a bonus for the Germans at the start, though it didn't last. And then, of course, we get heavy snow, which, when you're attacking through little country lanes and mountain passes and that kind of thing, it is certainly not ideal. And then we come to perhaps the most well-known part of the campaign, the Battle for Bastogne, where the American defenders were besieged in and around Bastogne and put under huge pressure by well, almost overwhelming forces, but they held, of course. And it led to that famous incident where General McAuliffe, on being asked by the Germans to surrender, gave his simple reply, nuts. From there we move into the US counterattack, spearheaded by Patton, of course, from the south, who broke the siege of Bastogne. And this is also where we get the arrival of the British forces, who came in from the north and largely blunted the centre spear point, which by that time was certainly running out of steam. Of course, the Germans had overstretched supply lines, they had shortages of fuel, shortages of ammunition and everything else. Nonetheless, the British played a major role in blunting the attack in the centre. And the author doesn't spare from showing us the horrors of war as well, because the Ardennes campaign was marked by a number of atrocities on the German side. That included the murder of civilians and of prisoners as well. So yeah, overall I think this is a great general guide to the campaign, and as I said, lots of photos in there to really give you a good sense of what went on. So as we learn in that first book, the German attack was divided into 3 spearheads. The one that gets the most attention, though ironically enough in some ways it was the one that achieved the least, is the northernmost one. And I think it gets the attention because this unit was made up of what remained of Hitler's elite forces from the Waffen-SS, in particular the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte, led by Joachim Piper. So the next book we're looking at is called The Devil's Adjutant, and this was written by another British Army officer, Michael Reynolds. So we've spoken about the overall battle. This gives us more of a personal view, if you like, both from the German and the American sides. But there's no doubt the lead character in this account is Piper himself. But when it comes to Piper, there's something we need to be very clear about, and Reynolds certainly makes this point very strongly in his book. Yes, we know that Piper was a very charismatic individual. Yes, we know he was a very effective commander and leader of men. But this is a man who joined the Waffen-SS very early on. I think he was 18, and he rose very quickly through the Nazi hierarchy. In fact, he became a personal aide to Heydrich and to Himmler as well. And we know that at least on one occasion he accompanied Himmler on a visit to Mauthausen concentration camp. So this is not a man who was conscripted against his will or anything like that. This was a man who was operating at the highest levels of the Nazi regime. So as I said, this book also written by a British military guy. Major General Michael Reynolds, CB, was educated at Sandhurst, at the Army Command and Staff College and the Royal College of Defence Studies, London. And is actually known as an expert on the Battle of the Bulge and Kampfgruppe Piper in particular, because 20 years ago he began to use this battle to demonstrate tactics and leadership to those under his command. And he's conducted almost 2,000 NATO soldiers through the battle on the ground where it took place. Very interesting. And the book was originally published in 1995. This particular edition is from 1997, revised and updated. In the US, it's published by Sarpedon Publishers, and here in the UK, it's published by Spellmount Limited. Now, one thing you notice with this book are the huge amount of maps. And as you'll see, we've got maps that go from showing the whole of the campaign. Just to give us a sort of sense of scale, there's Antwerp, which was the aim, right, of the thrust. And here's about where they got up to. So really not even halfway. But we go from that into sort of smaller maps. So there's our northern shoulder. That's the route that Piper took. And we even get down to actual, what you might call small-scale encounters, individual villages and places. And again, the Germans looking at capturing these vital crossroads. So these sort of skirmishes, you might call them, or encounters, are often quite small, but extremely vital for the success or otherwise of the German attack. So the book starts with some background on Piper, and there's a photo of him just after the campaign, and it gives something of his background. And as I said, it doesn't shy away from explaining his associations with the Nazi regime. In fact, there he is with Himmler at Mauthausen in 1941. We then get on to a detailed discussion of the German plan and how it was formulated, how it came about, the tasks that were expected or that these units were ordered to do. And I think Piper, when he was told his orders, actually took a Panther tank out and drove the distance to Antwerp across Germany just to see how long it would take. Of course, he was driving on a roll barn, or the equivalent of a motorway at the time, and even at that speed I think he was said to have mentioned that it's going to be impossible. As with the previous book, we then get a look at the equipment, and to some extent having that equipment, how they were going to use them, because here we get the tactics of blitzkrieg explained, which of course worked very well in France in 1940, but then the Germans had air superiority. They were in relatively open country and with good visibility, none of which they had in the winter of 1944. From the gaming perspective, we now get organisation of Piper's forces, and that is something repeated in the appendix at the back, where we get these charts for the German Kampfgruppers. So there's Piper, Hansen, Sandig, 150th Panzer Brigade, that was Skorzeny and his commandos, and the German tanks disguised as American tanks, Volksgrenadier Division, but also for the American forces as well, 30th US Infantry Division, and some of the tank units attached to that as well. So a lot of good information there on the organisation of the relative forces. From there we switch to the American perspective. So not only the equipment that the Americans had, which I said was mostly in terms of tanks, the M4 Sherman, but also the general feeling of morale on the Americans at that time. And I like the fact that the author says it's a misconception that most American soldiers in Europe in December thought the war would be over by Christmas. They'd been through some really heavy fighting, particularly around Hurtgen Forest, So I don't think the Americans here were under any illusion that the end of the war might be in sight, but it certainly wasn't going to be an easy job. Certainly wasn't going to be a walkover. The battle then starts, and it takes us through the initial stages, the initial breakthroughs and successes, though you might say that success brought its own problems, because there was a huge amount of German traffic trying to get through these little narrow muddy tracks was pretty much all they were in some cases. So I think a lot of units were actually held up and delayed, which may have had some effect on what happened later on. And we get this from the German and the American perspectives as well. And we get details of the Germans trying to capture fuel dumps. I think they managed to capture one of them racing for these bridges, which by and large they failed to get. There was one, as I said, that virtually blew up in Piper's face as they approached, and he was heard to swear damned engineers or something like that. And you can imagine the increasing frustration of Piper as his attack gradually got more and more bogged down. And we get detailed accounts here of all the major counters on Piper's route: Stavelot, Stoumont, La Glaise, and so on. And of course we also get an account of what became known as the Malmedy massacre. Now Reynolds has researched this very thoroughly, and I don't think anyone quite knows exactly what happened, but one thing that is clear was that a number of American prisoners of war were shot down in cold blood. And in the appendix at the back here, we get a list of those 113 names by way of memorial. By Christmas Eve, it was obvious that Piper's attack could not be sustained and had failed, and so began the retreat. And we get a nice account of this from Major Hal McCown of the American 119th Infantry Regiment, who'd actually been taken prisoner by one of Piper's units. So was actually with Piper as this retreat began. I think he later managed to escape. So Piper and some of his men managed to get back to German lines. There's speculation that Piper might have had some sort of breakdown or something after, because we get the fact that he doesn't appear again as an active commander until 14th of February, when he turns up commanding the Panzergruppe of the Leibstandarte in Hungary. That was, if you like, the last battle, the last offensive in the east, and I think achieved even less than the Ardennes offensive. Now that is not the end of the book, because Reynolds follows Piper's activities and what happened to him post-war, because of course with the Malmedy massacre and various other things, Piper was one of those who was imprisoned and put on trial at Nuremberg. So the last couple of chapters are about what happened there, and also what happened consequently when Piper was released and went to live in France. The author then finishes by asking the simple question: Hitler's last great offensive in the West and the attack of the 1st SS Panzer Corps through the Ardennes in December 1944 in particular beg the same question. Did either of them have any real chance of success? So this is an experienced military man, a major general, and we know something of his background, giving his own thoughts on, could the offensive have succeeded? Was it doomed to failure? What mistakes were made? And again, a lot of those what ifs that provide some rich speculation for gamers. So let's switch to gaming then. And I've spoken about this book before, so I'm just going to go through this fairly quickly. I picked this up at a comic convention of all places in Milton Keynes about a year or so back. And this is from the Flames of War rule set, which I'm not familiar with. I've never played Flames of War, but in that sense it doesn't really matter, because this is all about the units of the Bulge and the battle itself, and suggests scenarios and so on from it. This is the book on the German forces. I presume, of course, there'll be one on the American and British forces as well. And this, if you're playing from that German perspective, really gives you all the information you need to know. Our final book then, from the gaming perspective, I have covered this before, as I said. I'll put a link up to that upload in the notes below. So I'll just go through this pretty quickly. We get an overview of the situation at the time, both on the Western and the Eastern Front, some of the campaigns that have gone on before, Market Garden, Hürtgen Forest, etc., etc. And then we're into, again, remember this is all just looking at the German forces, so we're into stats for the German armour. And I think, as I said before, one of the appeals of this is that idea of using the heavy armour and these amazing colour schemes. That ambush colour scheme on the King Tiger is particularly striking. We get a look at the various types of infantry units as well, and of course this went from Waffen-SS down to Volksgrenadiers, and then we're into a very detailed organisation of the German forces. So as I say, from a gaming perspective, this is all the information you need, and I can see all this in 1/300 scale in my mind. You know, more information on how the units are built up, and these are all stats for this particular rule set here, of course. I mentioned paratroopers earlier on. That's not something that people often think about with the Ardennes, but there were Fallschirmjägers operational, and many were dropped in advance, and many were dropped ahead of the advance. They weren't particularly effective, as they tended to get scattered over a wide area. As you can imagine, dropping paratroopers in the middle of winter into heavily forested mountainous terrain, not ideal, not ideal at all. We get a description of some of the main German units involved, so the 506 Heavy Tank Battalion, something of their history, and then the part they played in the Battle of the Bulge, and beyond that as well. And we even get a look at the Luftwaffe as well, with the Me-262, which I think did fly operationally during the battle. I think it was called the Luftwaffe's Last Gasp. They mounted a huge sort of attack fairly late on in the battle, and that was pretty much the last throw of the dice for the Luftwaffe as well. And then we get details for those 3 scenarios that you can play separately or link together. We get Breakthrough, the bridges, and to the Meuse, which was one of the main objectives for Piper, I believe. Following that, we get almost like a mini catalogue here. I've not played this system at all, Flames of War. I'd be interested to hear from many of you who have. But one thing I've noticed they do are these great starter packs. And I have to say the models look very, very good. I'm assuming these are 28mm sort of scale. Very nicely painted, very nicely presented. All the major units, of course, and weapons. And I did notice at the back here, we've even got an Me-262. I was just thinking at 28mm scale, how long is that going to be over the table for? Like a quarter of a move or something? But nonetheless, it's like, now you see it, now you don't. If you want to include it, you can have a Me-262 attack as well. So, overall, an excellent book from the gaming perspective. Also lots of good historical information as well. And I'm sure there's an equivalent for the Allied forces. And as I said, I know they do this type of book for all the other major World War II campaigns as well. So those are the 3 books I've chosen today. 3 that I refer to again and again. For an overview, the first book, for that real detailed look at how the battle unfolded on the northern side, the Devil's Adjutant, and from the gaming perspective, that Flames of War guidebook as well. And at some point, I'm sure I'll pick up the American and British forces for that. Before we finish, I just wanted to mention quickly 2 other books as well, because there is another aspect that I've not spoken about, and that is where people go to visit these old battlefields. So people to Normandy, Waterloo, and so on. And there's 2 very good guides I've got to the battlefields as well. One is by David Cook and Wayne Evans, Kampfgruppe The Race to the Meuse. So this again is focusing on that northern attack. And it goes through the campaign in some detail, not as much as the Reynolds book. But what it also does is includes a sort of guide travel book alongside that. So you can literally start at point A and using this book work through Kampfgruppe Piper's whole route and then retreat back. And lots of photos again from then and now. The second one is a little more comprehensive. This is William C. Kavanagh, A Tour of the Bulge Battlefield. Now, Kavanagh is someone who's spoke with a lot of veterans. He's organised tours and trips for veterans, and he really knows the terrain, he really knows the history. So this is like a complete travelogue, really. It covers the whole campaign, the whole area, and again, lots of ideas on where to stay in hotels, best places to visit, how to plan your route. So really a ton of information should you get the chance to go on a Ardennes tour. So as I mentioned, I've always had a big interest in this campaign and would love to go and visit the Ardennes at some point to go on one of these tours. I guess with the aid of books like this, you can organise your own visit, and of course there are companies who arrange more sort of formal battlefield trips, usually accompanied by a historian, so those sort of things are available as well. Like everything, it's all down to time and money, but if I do ever get the chance to go, I will certainly film it and do a report for you. That's it for today then. That's it for our look at those 3 books on the Ardennes campaign. If you have any favourites, please do let me know. Particularly interested if it's something I haven't read before. It's something that often surprises me in that no matter how well you think a battle or campaign has been covered, Waterloo is a prime example, there's always something new that comes out. Maybe someone finds some new papers or new information, or sometimes someone looks at it from a whole new different angle and puts everything in a different perspective. So I'd be very interested to hear your recommendations. And something else as well I'd be interested in is Battle of the Bulge films. For such a major event, I can only think that there was one, in inverted commas, classic film, The Battle of the Bulge, which had Henry Fonda in it and was filmed with those American tanks. It looked like it was filmed in sort of summer or maybe autumn in California maybe or somewhere. Big open plains, hardly any trees at all, looked nothing like the Ardennes. And the story, I guess, well, it's a film of its time. So let me know if you've seen any later films, perhaps if there are any better films around. I'd be interested to find out about those as well. Thanks again for watching. As always, if you're enjoying the channel, please do like, share and subscribe. And I'll see you soon.